Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the Greg and Lisa show. As always, I'm Greg.
And I'm Lisa. And we're back together again this Saturday at 11 for our
Yes.
show topic, which is
Parenting.
yes, and disciplining your kids and how to make it work today.
Yes.
It's going to be an interesting discussion.
Yeah, this is
So
an interesting topic. It's not easy. There's not one answer you can give everybody for every situation. So,
there isn't. But you know what? We are always supposed to start doing things in love.
absolutely.
Whatever we do with our kids and how we treat them, it's always supposed to be done in love. And Jesus wants us to love our kids, and they're a blessing from Him. And we heard all those verses when we talked about kids in the Christmas
Oh,
vacation
yeah, we did.
section.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Well, you know what? It's a privilege to have kids and to love and teach them and to have good character and, to live according to God's laws. Now, I know we talked a little bit last time about, God's laws not being so far off from the Ten Commandments and the way we really are supposed to live just morally.
Yes, yes,
But,
absolutely.
some of them are love your parents and honor your father and your mother.
Do not lie, do not steal, do not cheat.
Right.
Do not commit murder, do not covet what others have. Love God and love your neighbor as yourself.
Right. And those are pretty important
Absolutely, they are.
things that we need to, teach our kids. But sometimes you have to assess the whole situation and look at everything as a whole. And if you have foster kids or adopted kids or children who have suffered trauma, you really need to get some outside help sometimes and go seek professional counseling. And not so much
Absolutely.
just for them, but for you as the parents.
Oh, yeah.
Because,
Yeah.
they need to have sometimes we have to have empathy and understanding and working with them and to get them to a point where they feel, loved and accepted right where they are.
Yeah, because, kids, this stuff is hard for us as adults, but kids really don't have any understanding. They didn't ask to be in a faster car, they didn't ask to be adopted. The kids love their mom and dad no matter, how badly their parents may have abused or neglected them.
Right. And it's like I remember when we were going through our emotionally disturbed training for kids, there was a little boy, Nicholas. He was 6 years old. And
Okay.
his mom dumped a whole pot of boiling water on him.
Ooh.
And so, of course, he was, put into one of our families. And no matter what, he wanted to go back to his mom. There's that bond that is created when you give birth to a child that is very hard to get rid of. And no matter how you treat these kids, they always want to go home.
I don't think you get rid of that.
You don't?
Yeah, I don't think you ever eliminate that.
You don't eliminate it, but as parents, when we have kids and we've been entrusted to have kids,
Sure.
we need to be mindful and respectful of how we treat the kids that God has blessed us
Absolutely.
with.
Yes.
Because there are lots of families that would love to have their own kids and have not been able to. And sometimes I think, having kids is taken for granted. But, as parents, we have to take responsibility for our actions. And what you do to your kids is harmful and can impact them the rest of their lives.
But yeah, obviously, potentially, you're not going to be perfect, but
Right.
you got to be cognizant of it and
Right.
aware of it and responsible for it.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And children's services is not always the answer. If you can't care for your kids, then you need to seek help. You need to see what resources are available. And the goal is to always try to keep the family unit together. But once you're a parent, your kids come first. And a lot of your wants and goals and desires, they get lower down on the list than they used to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you have to still nourish that marriage, because it takes two people to parent. And someday you're going to be an empty nest, and you still want to have that relationship with your spouse.
There are a lot of people who, once they become empty nesters, like, okay,
yeah, now what do we do?
yeah, right, and you don't even hear stories anyway, but
Right.
you don't even know that person anymore.
Yeah, you don't, because you invested all your time in the kids and the spouses and your together time and your date time.
Obviously, the kids have to be priority, but there still has to be a balance.
Correct. Yep. There has to be a balance. But also, parents need to practice what they preach. You have to set the example. One of my grandkids made a statement to me, and it said, I've been told that I'm supposed to ignore somebody that is bothering me. I'm supposed to let it roll off. But yet, when I sit by one of my parents and they tell me to stop, more or less, the parents weren't ignoring him to,
Yeah.
and so no matter how old they are, they make that connection,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And so, if we are going to teach our kids tools and things to use to adapt and to help us, we have to do the same thing.
Right.
And,
Right. And we all need to do a better job of that. But
right,
keep in mind, we're not saying don't correct your
correct.
children.
Oh,
We're,
no.
we're not we're not
Yeah.
saying, let
No,
everything just
no,
happen and let them,
no,
run wild and do
no.
what they want.
Absolutely not, because you're the
But
parent.
there are better ways to do things
Right,
sometimes than the ways we might
right.
be used to, or the ways that might seem most natural.
Yeah. And so we're going to start with Bible verses this time, and we usually do that at the end, but we want to have a little, have you have some background a little bit as we begin to talk about parenting and disciplining.
Sure.
So Psalms 127, 3 and 4 tells us, and we discussed this verse last time too, it's about children are a heritage from the Lord, offspring a reward from him. Children are a blessing. Not everybody gets to have that blessing,
No,
and
no,
you
they
have
don't.
to really, be appreciative of it.
Right.
Matthew 18, 1 through 6 talks about children are precious to the Lord, and that we are supposed to be like, we're children of the Lord. And, if we don't become childlike, we're not going to enter the kingdom of heaven. And, verse 6 specifically says, if anyone causes one of the little ones that believe in me to stumble, it would be better for them to have a large millstone hung around their neck and to be drowned in the depths of the sea.
Well, that doesn't sound serious at all.
No, but the alternative is being cast into the lake of
Right.
fire.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. It's just
Yeah.
the seriousness of this stuff. Obviously, God's grace and still applies,
Right.
but it's just to understand how serious the Lord takes all this stuff.
Right.
All right. Psalm 139, verses 13 through 16. For you created my inmost being; you knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are beautiful. I know that full well.
Right. Colossians 3:21 says, "Fathers, do not embitter your children, or they will become discouraged." Ephesians 6:4 says, "Fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instructions of the Lord."
Yeah, because he'll do a better job than you ever could. So the more closely you can follow that, and
Right,
yep.
right. But, according to ChristianCounseling.com, they had an article out there that says, "I have a difficult child. What do I do?" And it says you need to realize the following.
First on that list, struggles between parents and children are normal. So there is an element of that, and you can get overwhelmed by it, and some of
Yeah,
that is just normal.
it is. And you have to accept that it's normal, and you're never going to get anything to stop 100% or to go away forever. But, you are in charge as a parent, but you're not in control always. You cannot control their thoughts and their feelings. And those are part of the tools that sometimes kids with trauma have to learn, is
Yes.
how to work with, their thoughts and their feelings and their emotions.
All right. Next one on the list here: instill character through effective discipline. So there's a difference between discipline and punishment. Mr. Webster coming at us, the dictionary states that discipline is training that corrects molds and perfects the mental faculties or moral. Discipline is something we do for our kids, not to our kids, according to James Dobson. The word, you want, go
Go
ahead.
ahead.
Oh, it's okay. The word discipline comes from the Latin word discipulus, which means student, pupil, or disciple. And as you can tell, the root of that word sounds very
Right.
much like disciple.
Right. And that's what Jesus, he was discipling us, and he still disciples
Yeah.
us when we read the Bible. And Dr. James Dobson, he had written a book a long, long time ago about the strong willed child. But, parents' goals are to build good character and to mold them and to shape them and develop godly character within them so they can be an honest, productive member of society as they grow up and go out in the world and they learn how to communicate with people. Proverbs 3:12 says, "The Lord disciplines those whom he loves. As a father, the son he delights in."
Right.
God disciplines us as adults.
Oh
and
yeah,
as
he
we go
does.
through
Oh yeah.
life,
Oh yeah.
because he loves us. And in turn, we discipline our kids because we love them and we want to see the best for them.
Yep.
So, what
Just yeah,
things?
some
Go
ideas
ahead.
for discipline coming next.
Yeah.
So setting firm but fair limits and boundaries. So don't be a doormat or a dictator, but this line and where that falls can kind of look different for every child, especially when you talk about kids who have been through trauma. You're going to
Right.
have to approach that differently.
Right. But kids need rules and consistency because it does make them feel safe and they know what to expect. If you don't remain consistent, then it sends mixed messages and it creates some additional anxiety levels because they don't know what to expect. And both parents really need to be on the same
Yeah,
page because if they're not, we know they're going to pit one parent against the other.
they're going to do that anyway, but it's that much worse if there's a
Right.
inconsistency.
Right.
It's harder to
Right.
combat.
But if they think you're not talking as parents and they think you're never going to know or you don't talk, so they're not going to see what's going on, that's why
Mm-hmm.
it's important that, the
Yep.
parents be on the same page.
Yep.
But and it says, don't give in to tantrums or reward bad behavior, threats, or ultimatums, because the bottom line is if you give in to that stuff, they're never going to change.
Yeah.
They
If
get what they
Yep.
want, so why change?
Yeah. There's no reason to change.
Right, there's no
Yep.
reason to change.
So you can use logical consequences. So if there are no consequences within the confines of the home, you create a world of chaos. Now, sometimes there are natural consequences, right?
There
So,
are natural
so
consequences, but if you have zero
yes,
consequences and you don't hold your
yep.
kids responsible or accountable, then you have mayhem. And you have to look at who's the parents in the home and who is God going to hold accountable for. We are all going to stand in front of God one day and give an account. And, God has entrusted children into our care
Yes,
and,
yes.
given us that responsibility. And so we are going to have to account on how why we raised the kids the way that we did. But we always tend to, especially as humans, and we are human, tend to stay away from things that cause pain. So when you think about it, though, when we complain as adults about the trials and tribulations that we go through, kids complain about a spanking or a grounding or whatever. But when you look at it, it's those challenges that we go through that makes us
Oh, it
stronger.
absolutely does. And you can
Right.
think if it's hard for us to see as adults, it's hard
Mm-hmm.
for a child whose brain is still developing to even
Right.
wrap their mind around that stuff. And it's tough. So today's parents, we don't. When I say this comment, no, we don't mean 100% of everybody, but
No.
you will. You see this a lot where parents are afraid to discipline their children for fear of being reported of abuse or reported to children's services, or kids threaten to turn their parents in just to get their own way.
Right, they do. And you hear that more and more. Before, you never heard it, but you do hear it today. But you have to look at it. Most states do not always consider that spanking is illegal or abuse. And if it's reasonable and moderate, and it's inflicted by a parent, teacher, or guardian to help restrain or to correct the child. So, spankings aren't necessarily taboo, but they are not always
Right, right.
necessarily
It
the
may not be
answer.
illegal, but may not always be the best,
Correct. Right.
approach.
But Proverbs 24:13 says, "Whoever spares the rod hates their children, but the one who loves their children is careful to
And the
discipline them."
rod there means exactly what it sounds like it means. It doesn't mean if you don't let your kids listen to Rod Stewart, something's going to happen.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean spare Rod. You can spare Rod Stewart if you want to your kids, and that's fine. I always have to say something like that
Yeah.
in the middle of it.
What?
So
I
just
went
just
to
where
a
yeah.
Rod Stewart concert once.
Oh yeah, no, you don't have to spare the rod. Rod Stewart's
Yeah.
fine, but
Yeah.
if you spare the rod, you're not violating Proverbs here.
Yeah.
So I do this, folks,
Yeah.
because one day she throws snowballs at me, so I have to kind of. This is my own little way
That's right.
of getting
That's
my
right.
own little jab in there, so to speak.
Right.
But there are various forms of discipline, right? So we talk about spanking's not always the answer. So
Right.
there are a lot of ways to go about it and things that you can do.
All right. And we talked about, the thinking chair a while back because instead of putting in him time out, the thinking chair came from Dr. Lehman's book about, how to discipline your kids without losing your mind, basically. But it gives the thinking chair gives them the opportunity to come up with a resolution to
Mm-hmm.
why they were put in the thinking chair to begin with. And it also, they are in control of how long they sit in the thinking chair. It's not you're going to sit them in time out for 10 minutes. It's about
Yeah,
they have to sit there and really think
and
about.
this has been tough for me with that one. You have to
Mhm.
approach that as letting them do it, right? Like
Yeah,
you can't look at, oh, we got to do this, this, and this, and are you
right.
really going to sit there forever? They're going to sit there forever. You gotta let. They're not literally forever, but if
Yeah,
they're going to sit there for 2 hours, you kind of
yeah.
have to let that.
You have to. You have to let it go. And they
Yeah,
have to come to that decision in their mind. And sometimes they're going to go through a process. They're going to be mad you put them there. They're not going to know what to think about or what to say. But, after they've been through the thinking chair a few times, they know how it works. And then, they come up with some of their own ideas and
yeah.
they apologize and it puts that back on them. So,
So obviously, other forms of discipline, loss of things, loss of privileges, confiscation of toys, tablets, phones, etc. Grounding, taking them away from
mm-hmm.
the outside up. This is this one can be interesting. That works for some kids, and then there are some kids who have been through a lot, and if you take a toy, they don't give a rip
Yeah.
that you've done that.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we as parents who are not always perfect but trying our best, we have a line we're not going to cross.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you can look at kids who have been through trauma or abuse and say, well, they've only ever been used to that line. So,
Right.
some of this stuff, there's a bit of trial and error, and
And that's why you have to
yeah,
look at the situation as a
yep,
whole,
yep, yeah,
because that's the only way you're going to figure it out. And,
right.
as you said before, parenting is not perfect, but we have to constantly think of how to
Or
make it
right.
work so that they will understand
Mm-hmm.
and learn a lesson.
And as
You
your
know,
kids grow, some of these methods may start to become, more effective.
right? They will. And Mr. Webster, we talked about that one before. That was one that I came up with when I was working because the first day I let both my kids stay home by themselves and I
Mm-hmm.
got 10 calls in an hour.
Mm-hmm.
Boy, that was it for me. So I went and picked them up, got two Webster's dictionaries. I took them to my mom's or grandma's and grandpa's, and they had to write the first 100 letters of the alphabet. One of them got A, one of them got B. They had to write the word, the phonetic spelling, and the definition. And I told them by the time they graduated from college, they'd have their own handwritten dictionary.
Yeah, yeah.
But, they didn't. They only had to do that once. Then all I had to do was say, do you want to visit Mr. Webster?
No, no, I
And
wouldn't
it
want to do
was
that.
it was a learning thing, but
Mm-hmm.
also it was discipline. It was practice writing. It was, learning new words, and it was something that had an effect on them that I only ever had to say that. But it's one of those things that you never know
Well,
until you try
yeah, and you have to
things.
take the time to let it play
Right,
out.
right, right.
You can't get impatient with something like that.
No, and luckily, I had to go back to work and my parents were there, and the one child did it, and it's a difference in kids, finished it in like 4 hours. The other one thought he was going to play around and not have to finish it because he was supposed to go spend the night with his cousin. Well, needless to say, he finished about 11 o'clock that night and
Mm-hmm.
didn't go spend the night with his
Right.
cousin. The other one is role playing. If you have a bossy child that tends to try to be in charge or be the mom, one of the things that I put my thinking cap on and
Mm-hmm.
came up with was that if they want to play that role, then they're going to need to be treated for that role. So they have to wash the floor, they have to cook or clean, they have to do whatever that role's responsibilities are. And once you explain that to them, they don't really want to do all of that.
No, no, they don't.
you know. But so there's a little role playing there to let them feel that it's really like to be the boss and to be in charge. Also, writing sentences or
Yeah,
words,
kind of like Mr.
paragraphs.
Webster. If you don't want to go that far,
Yeah, but
there's
I have to tell you, I don't know that it would have the same impact because they're
no,
going to be
no.
writing all the time,
Yeah,
a lot of times. But sometimes even writing an essay on a subject where they have to do a little bit of research or, maybe writing a letter to
Oh
somebody or
yeah,
a
that's
letter to
that's
God
right.
to do
Yeah,
something
yeah. So,
different.
and not even research, just something that
Yeah.
requires more thinking than
Right. Excuse me.
sometimes to repeat this thing 100 times works, sometimes it
Right.
doesn't. So you have
Right.
to
Right.
adapt.
And I put praying on the list, and I have thrown this suggestion out there because I think whenever you have two kids in the middle of an argument, um, making everybody stop and pray is going to stop the argument, and everybody's going to pray together. You know, and so it's one of those things that it could work twofold. You have to watch and you have to try and play with it. But we certainly don't want them to ever not want to pray. But
Correct.
also, if they see a example of how to resolve a problem and going to God
Right.
first, then it might be
Right.
something that is
Kids
good.
are smart. If they see that work,
Right,
they might do it
right,
before you even get there.
right. And we also talked before about the buddy shirts
Mm-hmm.
and the buddy pants where you put them in an extra large shirt and they have
Mm-hmm.
to work together and do teamwork. So, there's all kinds of things that you can do that doesn't involve, spanking. You can count on one hand how many times I spanked both my kids. And basically, I save the spanking for a lot of times safety issues. Putting the hand on the stove thing, that involves safety. But like I said, they're 40, both in their 40s, and they've been spanked less than 5 times in their whole life. So, there are times when it is necessary, and you,
Mm-hmm.
as the parent, have to make that
Yeah,
decision.
and
Hmm.
don't just you got to judge your situation.
You do. Hmm.
Less than 5 times for somebody in their 40s, that may not be the bar for you. You have
Hmm.
to look at your situation
Right.
and judge it. And
Right.
if you have kids who are getting into a lot of safety things,
Yeah. You have to come up with
yeah,
a workaround
I'm
that's
not
going to
suggesting
work.
you just go to it. I'm just saying, like we said, you
Yeah.
have to assess your own
Right.
situation.
Right. You do. So, but when it talks about consequences have to be logical, it's kind of like if the child doesn't get their homework done in the time allotted, and normally they would maybe go visit a friend after dinner. Well, they don't get to go visit that friend, they have to finish their homework. And so there has to be logical consequences, and the consequences have to come from within and not out of anger. Your consequences have to be out of love and not out of anger.
Right.
So,
So, this is kind of a hard one to say, but just you have to let your child have as much power and control to make as many decisions as possible.
right, and in decisions and giving them that control, it has to be things. How many times have you asked a child what they want and they can't decide?
Mm-hmm.
You know, well, a lot of times that's because they haven't had the opportunity to make those decisions because that decision's always been made for them. And so it's like when you take breakfast for example, it would be, do you want eggs or do you want cereal today? Let
Yeah,
them,
yeah.
let them make those
Getting used to,
decisions.
and the
Right.
more those small choices you give them,
Right.
the more the bigger areas of control they might
Right.
start to release on. It does not
Right.
just work
Right.
like you.
Right. And then it's
Yeah.
like, you let them pick what they want to wear that day or the pajamas that they want to put on that night. And your power and control to them is age appropriate to what they're going through
Yeah.
in their lives. And those parents, you know that.
Yep.
Though we have to be able to help them make decisions, and
Right.
they're going to make mistakes, and
Right.
that's normal, but that's how they learn, just like we learn when we make
Yep.
mistakes,
So it's important, really.
Mhm.
There's a natural consequence going on for a mistake. Try not to rescue them. Give them guidance. Ask them, questions
Mhm.
about it after the fact.
Right.
Kind of questions like what went wrong.
Right.
Why do you think it happened?
Hmm.
What are you going to do about this? Things that will help them work through why another way might have been better or
Right.
why this thing was a mistake.
Yeah. Yeah. And and how are you going to fix this? And what are you going to do to make things right? And what can you do differently next time? Coming alongside your child is where a lot of learning, growing, and maturing will take place. And you have to remember a lot of times with foster kids, adoptive kids, kids that have been through trauma,
Yes.
they may have had zero parenting. And so they don't even know how to act or how to fit in. And so it is going to take a lot of patience and grace
Mm-hmm.
and prayer and seeking the Lord, because you know it just is.
Yeah, yeah, just
because
yeah,
they have so many
yeah,
other things in their lives and their
yeah,
minds that they've experienced that we can't even fathom, and nor should they have ever experienced them in their little
yeah.
lives. So, in fact, I was watching a show today, and my favorite show is AGT, and there was a gentleman on there from Canton, Ohio,
Mm-hmm.
and he had no legs, and he was in the foster care system for 17 years, and he was abused, and basically, they took him for the paycheck. And finally, when he was 17 years old, getting ready to age out of the system, his mom adopted him. And he is a phenomenal guy, and he has been through so much. But he he went through a lot to get to where he is now, and there is no excuse whatsoever for what he had to endure. And but this mom that adopted him and the love that they have now is astronomical, and that's through to me, it's through the grace of God.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
There's no other explanation
right,
for how
no,
that.
and may
Yeah,
God continue to bless
yeah,
him as he goes through life. But that, being said, there's going to be times when you will need to put your foot down.
yeah, and you
Mhm.
have to balance it out. So when you do see good behavior, positive behavior, employ lots of rewards,
Right.
lots of praise. Be your kid's biggest cheerleader. You get more with honey than vinegar.
You do. You do. And sometimes you have to set up short-term goals and long-term goals
Yeah,
and so they can earn something or
yeah,
look
especially
forward to
kids like you
doing
said,
something.
adopted, foster
Hmm.
care kids that've been through trauma. They have no concept of what a long-term goal even looks like. So
They have no
sometimes
concept of time.
these
Hmm.
smaller steps do become important.
Right.
So
And a lot of times there's things that we take for granted. We know what a day is or 3 days is.
or an hour
Well,
or two,
yeah,
even all
yeah.
that stuff.
And
Yeah,
they don't. And sometimes, people are visual learners, especially kids. They have to see it, so they have to mark it off and they have to see, what an end goal is. But, we have to learn to give our kids what they need and not everything that they
right,
want, you
right.
know. So, and discipline is effective only if it helps build godly character.
If it helps cultivate the fruit of the spirit, joy, peace, love,
Right.
all of them.
Contentment. Yeah. And if it helps them love God and love others and love themselves the way God does more. And if it helps them be more like Jesus. And a lot of times, especially in um, adoptive kids, foster
Yeah,
kids, they don't think that they're worth anything. Their mom and dad, they couldn't take care of them. They weren't important enough for them to, get them back. And so they really struggle to love themselves. And so that's one of the things that, we have to instill in our kids is they have to have a love for themselves because, when we go back to our bullying episode, they get so negative
hmm,
and, they get depressed and they have that negative vision that, we need to really help them and to make them more like Jesus and learn that, we love unconditionally just like Jesus does.
right. So
Uh,
we mentioned earlier, obviously in the verse, but don't embitter or discourage your children. You have to ask yourself if your child even has the ability to accomplish whatever goal or bar you're setting for them. And if you nitpick your kids too much, they feel like they can't do anything right, or all I do is mess up, and that's tough, especially with kids who have been through trauma. The littlest thing will send them into
mm-hmm.
that kind of mode.
Right. And so we have to remember, there's that song, God is the master of, He is the potter and we are the clay. And so He is the master potter. He is the one that designed us, just like the
Mm-hmm.
verse said. He knit you together in your
Yeah.
mother's womb.
Yep.
And He already had a plan for you, when He knew you were going to be born. Well, our children are the clay, and God made them with their own individual gifts and talents and personalities and their deepest heart's desires. And God shapes us through our lives, through our whole lives. We're always going to be learning and growing.
Yep.
And so are our children. They are going to be constantly learning and growing.
Right. So speaking of that, like things you don't want your kids to learn, you need to handle your own anger and frustration appropriately. You don't want to unload on your children. You don't want to discipline, a child when you're angry. And sometimes stressful things are going to happen. If there's like a safety issue, like you
Mm-hmm.
said, there's going
Right.
to be a little bit of that. But you got to
Right.
do your best to keep control of that.
Yeah. You do. And, we teach the kids to count to 10 or to walk away or to ignore. And sometimes we as adults have to learn to walk away and count to 10 and then come back when we have cooled down. But, we always want to give the discipline and consequences in love and with care and understanding and sympathy and never in
Yep.
anger.
So, ask for forgiveness and repent when you do, make those missteps. When you realize you were the problem, ask God for forgiveness and apologize to your child. They need to see adults doing that. If a kid's never seen somebody apologize,
Hmm.
they don't know what really being sorry means.
No,
And
they don't.
it's not going to show them weakness. It's going to show,
No.
oh,
Right.
okay. So if this
Hmm.
person does, maybe
Right.
mess up, they are going to,
Right, and that
own
goes
up to
back
that.
to practicing what we preach.
Yeah.
People have to see us apologize and repent and be sorrowful if we want them to experience and live that way too, like, God does. And so, there are no perfect parents. We know that. And everyone is going to hit bumps in the road. And if you need help, you need to ask for help. Find a good faith based counselor. There's no shame in
Yeah.
asking for
Honestly,
help.
find a good faith-based counselor.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we really do need the more clinical counselor and
Mm-hmm.
some other steps. So there's no shame in that either. And
Right.
the biggest thing for me with all of this stuff that we've been through is it, and that I have a hard time with is this takes time, right? Sometimes you're going to do all these great techniques, you're going to take all these classes, you're going to do it, and it's going to seem like your child just
Doesn't get
doesn't
it.
care,
Yeah,
doesn't get it,
doesn't care.
not
Yeah.
effective, and you're going to
Yeah.
try another thing, and that's not going to be effective. So
Mm-hmm.
you
You
know
just keep trying. You never
the,
give
the
up.
the way God doesn't give up on us, right?
Right.
Like it should be reflective of that.
Right. That's right. And that's what we are called to do. Is we are to disciple our kids, and God is continually
Well, yeah,
discipling us, and
because
we
we've got,
have to keep moving forward.
right,
um,
right,
and they find a good Bible based church. I
yes,
can't stress enough, and I have told this to lots of young people and lots of single moms, and they just blow it off. But it's like you can't understand the family, a church family that will rally and support you, that will help with the kids, that will be there for you. I was a single mom and I had lots of grandmas in my church that helped me with the kids. So it relieved some of the burden off
yeah.
my own
And you
parents.
mentioned that a single mom finding some
Mm-hmm.
grandmothers, like it doesn't
Yeah,
always, look the way you think it's going to
right,
look. And
right.
when we say find a Bible-based church, I would realize some people don't even know exactly what that means or exactly
Mm-hmm.
what that looks like. So you will start to get a feel for it. So
Right.
God will have grace. Yeah, if you're somebody who's never been to a
Mm-hmm.
church
Yep.
and you pick one that's maybe not the best,
Yeah.
you're not in trouble.
No, and it
You
takes
learn to,
time to find the right
yeah.
church. But when we do talk about a Bible based church, we talk about a preacher that preaches from the Bible.
Right. That
That
is
is what is
that is what that
important.
means, and
Right,
you start to know quickly what that sounds like, and if
right,
where you are doesn't
right.
sound like that.
And if you have any questions or concerns, and pick up the Bible and do some research online and find out if what that preacher is telling you is
Well,
true.
that's what our
You know?
pastor always says. He's
Mm-hmm.
like, "Hey, if I ever don't sound like the Bible, y'all
Mm-hmm.
should get me out of here."
Yeah,
you know?
that's exactly right.
Yeah.
But anyways, we know that parenting is hard.
Right.
It's hard for kids. It's hard for parents. It's hard on marriages.
It's
It's
hard.
hard
Sometimes we
as
can
a
say that.
whole.
You said it earlier, one of our
Mm-hmm.
comments, like, well, it's hard because it just is. We always try to
Mm-hmm.
analyze these things and find little ways we can deal with it. And
Yeah.
sometimes a thing truly, and I say this, I need to practice what I preach, but sometimes a thing just is what it is. Like
Yeah.
sometimes it truly is. There may be little things you can nitpick at with it, but sometimes you have to really look at it that way. As
You have
this
to
is
choose
just
your
this,
battle.
yeah,
Yeah, you have to choose your battles, and you have to, go back sometimes, have family meetings like we talked about
yeah.
before. You have to get the kids involved. You have to look at everything as a whole. But I think you need to pray together as a family. One of the statistics, and we will talk about divorce and marriage in one of our shows coming up. But marriages and partners, families that pray together, especially the husband and wife, have a less than 1% chance of going through a divorce.
And that is amazing, because when you
It
consider
is.
just naturally the rates over
Yes.
50%, or
That's right.
we had all those numbers about
Right.
how high that percentage
Yeah.
gets. It's well over half.
Right.
So
But,
for less than 1%, And the simple step is just praying together.
Yeah, is your husband and wife praying
Yeah,
together?
you got to start that, right?
Yeah.
Because sometimes, you know, the damage can be, the behaviors can happen, affairs can happen, things can
Right.
happen where sometimes it's, I don't want to say it's ever too late to pray, but sometimes in our imperfect
Yeah.
minds, it does become,
Well, and that comes
too late
back
when we
to
start
what
that.
your relationship is with Jesus Christ.
Right.
Because, there are those marriage enrichment seminars that, people have gone to. They've had divorce papers, filed or ready to be filed, and they've gone through the marriage enrichment weekends, and they have learned that that's not really what they wanted.
Right.
Things went by the wayside.
Right.
But, it comes back to your personal relationship
Right.
with Jesus Christ.
Well,
And you
like I
both,
said, we'll get into the marriage and
yeah,
divorce topic
right.
a little more, but
We will, but
yep.
you have to also keep in mind if your marriage isn't working, a lot of times your parenting
Right.
isn't
There's
going to
absolutely
work
no
either.
way you can
Yes.
do
Yes.
that.
So,
I mean, obviously, there are single
right.
parents, right? But,
Right.
and after people have been through divorce, there are people who are able to do this effectively, but
Right.
it's more effective if you keep it together. It
is.
has to be.
It
There's
is.
no way it's not.
Right. Right, because a lot of our situations today that we have is due to the demise of the family. And
Right.
that's been proven multiple times in various polls and statistics that, the demise of the family has had a great impact on, kids, marriages, the world as a whole. But anyways, as you are parenting your children, it is not impossible. And you just need to seek wise counsel. A lot of times that's going to the Bible. A lot of times that's going to God. Sometimes it's going to a faith-based counselor. Sometimes it's talking it over with your best friend or somebody else that's going through the same thing. But you have to remember that your little kids are humans,
Mm-hmm.
and that, they have a heart and a mind and a soul, and that we are here, as caretakers of them, that God has entrusted us.
Yes.
And we need to do our ultimate best to bring them up in a way God would be proud and want us to do.
Absolutely.
So, anyways, that's our topic today.
Yeah, sorry we started to get into marriage and divorce a little bit. We'll get that full episode out there. We could sit there and talk about that one.
Yeah, I'm sorry Grandma wasn't able to
to
share with us today, but I'm sure she'll be around.
We'll have to get Grandma in here in the future.
Yeah,
I'm sure she's got other topics she would like to weigh in on. So you have a more direct line to Grandma than I do. So
I'm sure.
Yep.
So thank you for being with us today. We'll be praying with you throughout the week. Thanks for listening and joining us. Send us an email or
the Greg and Leisa
Facebook.
Show at gmail.com.
Right.
The Greg and Leisa Show,
yep.
YouTube and Facebook as well.
Right.
Yep.
But have a great week.
All right. See you, everybody.